Hello and welcome to video related to all functions category in DAX. In previous videos, we have understood what kind of values are accepted in filter parameter of calculate function. Then to overcome some of the limitations, we have to use filter function. Now all of these topics were related to applying additional filter context or modifying the initial filter context. Let us assume that instead of applying or modifying the filter context, you wish to remove all the filter context coming from visuals or elsewhere inside the DAX. Under such situation, you need to use DAX functions under all category. There are primarily three functions which are most frequently used. These are all except, and all selected. They are all very similar in what they do. They remove the initial filter context during the evaluation process. So let us first understand the syntax and then we will see few of the examples directly inside Power BI desktop. The first function here is all. You can use it in two approaches. The first one is giving table reference in the first argument and then giving the column references in subsequent arguments. This will then remove any filter context on these columns mentioned. You can mention any number of column references in subsequent arguments from that single table only. Else, you can use a second approach where you can refer to the entire table in the first argument. This function will then remove any filter context present on any of the columns from that particular table. Then the second function is all except. This function simply helps to reduce the typing effort while you use all function. This will be used where you want to remove filter context from multiple columns from a single table except for one or more columns. For example, imagine that there are 12 columns in a particular table and you want to remove filter context only from 11 columns and keep the filter context intact for one column. Then in that case, you will be using this function. In other words, you want to keep a filter context intact for few columns and remove from the rest of the columns. So instead of using all function and then typing all the columns from which the filter context needs to be removed, you will use all except in such instances. Using this function, you can mention the column names which should have a filter context intact, and for any other columns, filter context will be removed. And finally, we have all selected. I think this function is best understood once we have a look at the case study. So you will have to wait a little bit to know more about this. Now before I move on to the Power BI desktop, I would like to summarize some of the combination through which you can use this function. So you can specify a single column under each of these three functions. Each one of these three functions will work when you are referring to a single column only. Next is referring to the entire table, so that the filter context on any of the columns coming from that table will be removed. This will be working only with all and all selected function. It won't work with all except. Next situation might be referring to multiple columns from a single table. This will also work with only all and all except. You can't specify multiple columns while using all selected. And finally, there can be instances where you either like to remove filter context from multiple tables or multiple columns from different tables. So to get the desired result in this kind of instances, you will have to insert this function multiple times inside the relevant DAX measure. Most of these functions are used inside filter argument of calculate or inside first argument of filter function. So I think it's enough of this theory. Let us now look at real life example in our next video. So see you guys.